laboratories built to make mysteries smaller, rooms of glass, steel, fluorescence, and procedure, where human uncertainty is reduced to samples, swabs, slides, and reports. But some mysteries do not shrink under examination. They multiply. FBI forensic investigator Peter Hayward returned to the 42 coffins at Quantico headquarters on Monday with renewed purpose and diminished sleep, only to find the rotting corpses of two custodians, John Doty and Edward Lester, lying dead on the laboratory floor, poisoned by the cyanide-laced chocolates they ate from boxes of candy they found within several of the caskets. Hayward did not say aloud what he believed. Federal agents were not encouraged to accuse corpses of conspiracy, but privately, beneath his lab coat and professional restraint, he had begun with a premise both absurd and unavoidable. The poisonings had not been accidental. They had been arranged. For whom, by whom, or by what remained the question. According to his training and intuition, Hayward dusted the coffins for fingerprints. Every lid, every handle, every brass hinge, every polished surface. His necrophobia made the work almost unbearable. Each casket seemed to breathe beneath his hands. Each open lid resembled a mouth waiting to speak. Yet he continued, because fear had its own forensic value. It kept a man alert. The expected prints appeared first: Thomas Martin, Emily Westbrook, Harold Finch. Their fingerprints decorated the exterior surfaces in places consistent with handling, transport, and excavation. But then there was another set, clear, repeated, unidentified. The same unknown fingerprints appeared on all 42 coffins. More disturbing still, those same prints appeared inside the caskets, on the cell phones, and on the boxes of Godiva chocolates. Not Martin's, not Emily's, not Finch's, not Doty's, not Lester's. One unknown hand had touched everything. Hayward stared at the evidence board late that afternoon, the prints enlarged and pinned backlit against an examination lamp. "Who are you?" he whispered. The room offered no answer as the coffins sat stoically in their neatly arranged columns and rows. The next phase was chemical and biological. For this, Hayward summoned a team of chemists and forensic genealogists. They searched the interiors for DNA, the modern oracle, the holy grail of criminal proof. For hours they found nothing. Then, in 5 of the coffins, they found small amounts of dried saliva, nearly invisible to the untrained eye, preserved impossibly well. The samples were found in the coffins cataloged as those belonging to Martin's parents and his 3 siblings. The lab ran comparisons against the blood sample taken from Thomas Martin during his booking at the Ashwick police station. The result returned the next morning, a familial match. Each saliva sample belonged to Martin's murdered family. Hayward read the report 3 times. No bodies had ever occupied those coffins. No burial had taken place. The caskets had appeared beneath Martin's backyard cemetery as if they were delivered by logic older than Earth. Yet traces of victims who were never laid to rest in those coffins were found inside. It was as if the dead themselves had gasped their last breath and whispered it into the lining. Then came the receipt. It was found inside one open box of chocolates, a sales receipt from a gourmet shop in Newport, Rhode Island. The purchase date was the day after Thanksgiving just over 1 year ago, precisely 1 day after Thomas Martin murdered his family members at his dining room table. Hayward felt the first true shape of the case forming before him. Not a line, not a chain, but a circle. And now, it is time for us to take a brief respite to listen to an intermezzo conceived by world-renowned composer E. Dudek, after which the saga of Thomas Martin will resume. We continue. That afternoon, Hayward called the Batesville Casket Company in Indiana. An operator connected him with John Sterling, the company's chief financial officer. After stating the purpose of his call, Hayward read off the serial numbers of the caskets in his possession. Sterling asked Hayward if he could place him on a brief hold while he checked his database. Sterling's voice returned thinner than before. Mr. Hayward, we have no record whatsoever of manufacturing caskets with those serial numbers. How far back did you check? 50 years. Hayward looked through the glass wall toward the 42 coffins. And the brass plates? Your company's name is on them, said Hayward. And our town, our style. But they are not found in our inventory, said Sterling. Do you have any idea whose inventory they may have come from? Sterling did not answer. Some questions were too heavy to pass through a telephone wire. Back in Ashwick, by mere happenstance, Emily Westbrook bumped into Harold Finch in the frozen foods aisle of Tilton's Market. Finch was holding a bag of frozen peas and looking like a man deciding whether vegetables were worth surviving for. Mr. Finch, Emily said. He turned, saw her, and nearly dropped the bag of peas. You, he said. I figured you'd be somewhere else. Where? Anywhere that ain't near this goddamn mess. Emily lowered her voice. Have you heard from them? Finch glanced up at the fluorescent lights overhead. Lady, I hear things every night now. Digging, knocking, sometimes a train, sometimes somebody saying my name from inside the walls. Emily stepped closer. What do they want? Finch gave a short, humorless laugh. Same thing everybody wants when they's been wronged. What? He looked right at her. Gone from his face was all his rustic foolishness, and he said, to be counted right. 25 miles away, Thomas Martin sat alone in his prison cell assembling his defense. He had no law books before him, no attorney, no notes from legal counsel, only a pencil and a pad of paper, and the certainty that the living had mistaken jurisdiction for truth. He wrote, Argument 1. A corpse alone does not establish criminal intent. Then, Argument 2. Date of death preceded indictment. Then, Argument 3. The dead are independent actors with agency over themselves. Then, from somewhere down the prison corridor came a whisper. Justice. Martin did not look up. Another whisper followed. Justice. Then a cacophony of many voices, a chorus moving through concrete, through iron, through institutional paint, calling out, Justice. Martin placed his pencil down. I understand, he said quietly. The whispers stopped. His cell grew cold. Then, from beneath his bunk, came the sound of a cell phone vibrating. Martin knelt and reached into the darkness. The phone was there. Of course it was. One message waited for him on the screen. They found our prints. Martin stared. A second message arrived. They found our breath. Then a third. Now they will find the door. At Quantico, as midnight settled across the federal laboratory, Peter Hayward stood alone before the 42 coffins. He should have gone home. He did not. Instead, he approached the 5th coffin, the one belonging to Martin's youngest sister. He lifted the lid. Inside, the cell phone glowed. This was inexplicable because Hayward removed and cataloged the batteries from all of the cell phones earlier that day. The screen displayed a single message. Hello, Peter. His throat closed. Another message appeared. You fear the dead. Hayward stepped back. All 42 coffin lids opened at once, not loudly, politely, like guests rising for an introduction. And from each casket came the same sound, not breathing, not speech, a train whistle, low, approaching. At the correctional facility, Thomas Martin smiled in his cell. In the checkout line, Harold Finch dropped his frozen peas. In the parking lot, Emily Westbrook's headlights went out, and at Quantico, Peter Hayward saw reflected in the polished brass plate of the nearest coffin, not his own face, but a platform, a lantern, a line of passengers waiting patiently beside black iron rails. And here we have it. One federal investigator tasked with discovering the origin of 42 coffins. A man who searched for fingerprints and found trespass. A man who searched for DNA and found testimony. A man who called the manufacturer and discovered that some things bearing a label were never made by human hands. There are crimes committed by the living, but there are judgments carried out by the dead. Somewhere beyond admissible evidence, beyond expert testimony, beyond the trembling reach of science, a train had begun boarding, and its destination remained unchanged. It was bound for the Conflation Station.